Chapter 4. Own Life. Winston sat at the table and opened his diary. He thought of his parents. He was, he thought, about 10 or 11 years old when his mother disappeared. She was a tall, silent woman with lovely fair hair. He could not remember his father so well. He was dark and thin, and always wore dark clothes. They had both been vaporized in the 1950s. His thoughts moved to other women, and he started writing in the diary. It was 3 years ago. It was on a dark evening, in a narrow side street near one of the big railway stations. She had a young face with thick makeup. I liked the makeup. The whiteness and the bright red lips. No woman in the party wore makeup. There was nobody else in the street and no telescreens. She said $2. It was too difficult to continue. Winston wanted to hit his head against the wall, to kick the table over and throw the diary through the window, anything to stop the memory of that night. It was, of course, illegal to pay a woman for sex, but the punishment was about 5 years in a work camp, not death. The party knew it happened. Some prole women sold themselves for a bottle of gin, and the party didn't worry much about that. The party wanted to stop love and pleasure in sex, not sex itself. A request to marry would be refused if a man and a woman found each other attractive. Sex, to the party, was only necessary to make children. He thought of Catherine, his wife. Winston had been married. He was probably still married. If his wife was dead, nobody had told him. They had lived together for about 15 months, 9, 10, 11 years ago. Catherine was a tall, fair-haired girl who moved well. She had an interesting face, until you found out that there was almost nothing behind it. She believed everything the party said. She had sex only because it was her duty to try and have children. When no children came, they agreed to separate. Every 2 or 3 years since then, Winston had found a prole woman who had agreed to have sex for money. But he wanted his own woman. He finished the story in his diary. When I saw her in the light, she was quite an old woman. She had no teeth at all. But I had sex with her. He had written it down at last, but it did not help. He still wanted to shout and scream. He had walked several kilometers. It was the second time in 3 weeks that he had missed an evening at the party members' club. This was not a good idea. Your attendance at the club was carefully checked. A party member had no free time and was never alone, except in bed. It was dangerous to do anything alone, even go for a walk. There was a word for it in Newspeak. Own life, it was called, meaning separation from everybody else. He was walking in a prole area near a building that had, in the past, been an important railway station. The houses were small and dirty and reminded him of rat holes. There were hundreds of people in the streets, pretty young girls, young men chasing the girls, fat old women, the pretty girls in 10 years' time. Dirty children with no shoes ran through the mud. The people looked at him strangely. The blue overalls of the party were an unusual sight in a street like this. It was unwise to be seen in such places, unless you had a definite reason to be there. The thought police would stop you if they saw you. Suddenly, everybody was shouting and screaming and running back into their rat-hole houses. A man in a black suit ran past Winston and pointed at the sky. "Bomb!" he shouted. "Up there! Bomb!" Winston threw himself to the ground. The proles were usually right when they warned you that a bomb was falling. When he stood up, he was covered with bits of glass from the nearest window. He continued walking. The bomb had destroyed a group of houses 200 meters up the street, and in front of him he saw a human hand cut off at the wrist. He kicked it to the side of the road and turned right, away from the crowd. He was in a narrow street with a few dark little shops among the houses. He seemed to know the place. Of course. He was standing outside the shop where he had bought the diary. He was afraid, suddenly. He had been mad to buy the diary, and he had promised himself he would never come near this place again. But he noticed that the shop was still open, although it was nearly 21 hours. He would be safer inside than standing there doing nothing outside, so he went in. If anyone asked, he could say he was trying to buy a razor blade. The owner had just lit a hanging oil lamp, which smelled unclean, but friendly. He was a small, gentle-looking man of about 60, with a long nose and thick glasses. His hair was almost white, but the rest of his face looked surprisingly young. He looked like a writer, or perhaps a musician. His voice was soft, and he didn't speak like a prole. "I recognized you when you were outside," he said immediately. "You're the gentleman who bought the diary. There's beautiful paper in that diary. No paper like that has been made for, I'd say 50 years. He looked at Winston over the top of his glasses. "Is there anything special I can do for you? Or did you just want to look round?" "I was, passing," said Winston, "and I just came in. I don't want to buy anything." "Well, that's all right," said the shop owner, "because I haven't got much to sell you." He looked round the shop sadly. "Don't tell anyone I said so, but it's difficult to get old things these days. And when you can get them, nobody wants them." The old man's shop was full of things, but they were all cheap and dirty and useless. "There's another room upstairs that you could look at," he said. Winston followed the man upstairs. The room was a bedroom with furniture in it. There was a bed under the window, taking nearly a quarter of the room. "We lived here for 30 years until my wife died," said the old man sadly. "I'm selling the furniture slowly. That's a beautiful bed, but perhaps it would be too big for you." Winston thought he could probably rent the room for a few dollars a week, if he dared to. It would be so peaceful to live as people used to live in the past, with no voice talking to you, nobody watching you. "There's no telescreen," he said. "Ah," said the old man. "I never had one. Too expensive." There was a picture on the wall. It showed a London church that used to be famous in the days when churches were famous and people still went to them. Winston did not buy the picture, but he stayed in the room talking to the old man whose name, he discovered, was Charrington. Even when he left, he was still thinking about renting the room. But then, as he stepped into the street, his heart turned to ice. A woman in blue overalls was walking towards him, not 10 meters away. It was the girl with dark hair, the one in the Young People's League. The girl must be following him. Even if she was not in the thought police, she must be a spy. The thought police would come for him one night. They always came at night, and they always caught you. And before they killed you, before you asked them on your knees to forgive you for your thought crime, there would be a lot of pain. Part 2. Acts Against the Party. Chapter 5. A Political Act. 4 days later, he saw the girl with dark hair again. He was walking to the toilets at the Ministry of Truth, and she was coming towards him. She had hurt her hand. She had probably hurt it on one of the story-writing machines. It was a common accident in that department. The girl was about 4 meters away when she fell forwards. As she fell, she hit her hand again and cried out in pain. Winston stopped. The girl got to her knees. Her face had turned a milky yellow colour, making her mouth look redder than ever. She looked at him, and her face seemed to show more fear than pain. Winston felt a strange mix of emotions. In front of him was an enemy who was trying to kill him. In front of him also was a human being, in pain, and perhaps with a broken bone. Already he had started to help her. He felt that her pain was in some strange way his own. "You're hurt?" he said. "It's nothing. My arm. It'll be all right in a second." He helped her up. "It's nothing," she repeated. "Thanks, comrade." She walked away quickly. Winston was standing in front of a telescreen, so he did not show any surprise on his face, although it was difficult not to. As he had helped her up, she had put something in his hand. It was a piece of paper. He opened it carefully in his hand in the toilet, but did not try to read it. You could be certain the telescreens would be watching in the toilets. Back in his office, he put the piece of paper down on his desk among the other papers. A few minutes later, he pulled it towards him, with the next job he had to do. On it, in large letters, was written, "I love you." For the rest of the morning, it was very difficult to work. At lunchtime in the canteen, the fool Parsons, still smelling of sweat, did not stop talking to him about all the work he was doing for Hate Week. He saw the girl at the other end of the canteen, at a table with 2 other girls, but she did not look in his direction. In the afternoon, he looked at the words, "I love you," again, and life seemed better. He believed her. He did not think she was in the thought police, not now. He wanted to see her again. How? How could he arrange a meeting? It was a week before he saw her again in the canteen. He sat at her table and at that moment saw Ampleforth, the dreamy man with hairy ears who rewrote poems. Ampleforth was walking around with his lunch, looking for a place to sit down. He would certainly sit with Winston if he saw him. Winston had about a minute to arrange something with the girl. He started to eat the watery soup they had been given for lunch. "What time do you leave work?" he said to the girl. 18:30. "Where can we meet?" "Victory Square, near the picture of Big Brother. It's full of telescreens. It doesn't matter if there's a crowd. But don't come near me until you see me among a lot of people. And don't look at me. Just follow me." "What time?" 19 hours. "All right." Ampleforth did not see Winston and sat down at another table. Winston and the girl did not speak again, and they did not look at each other. The girl finished her lunch quickly and left, while Winston stayed to smoke a cigarette. He arrived at Victory Square early. Big Brother's picture looked up at the skies where he had beaten the Eurasian aeroplanes, or East Asian aeroplanes, it had been a few years ago, in the Great Air War. 5 minutes after the time they had arranged, Winston saw the girl near Big Brother's picture, but it was not safe to move closer to her yet. There were not enough people around. But suddenly, some Eurasian prisoners were brought out and everyone started running across the park. Winston ran too, next to the girl, lost in the crowd. "Can you hear me?" she said. "Yes." "Are you working this Sunday afternoon?" "No." "Then listen carefully. Go—" Like a general in the army, she told him exactly where to go. A half-hour railway journey, turn left outside the station, 2 kilometres along the road, a gate, a path across a field. She seemed to have a map inside her head. "Can you remember all that?" she said finally. "Yes." "What time?" "About 15 hours. You may have to wait. I'll get there by another way." She moved away from him. But at the last moment, while the crowd was still around them, her hand touched his, though they did not dare look at each other. Winston opened the gate and walked along the path across the field. The air was soft and the birds sang. You were not safer in the country than in London. There were no telescreens, of course, but there were microphones, and the thought police often waited at railway stations. But the girl was clearly experienced, which made him feel braver. He had no watch, but it could not be 15 hours yet, so he started to pick flowers. A hand fell lightly on his shoulder. He looked up. It was the girl, shaking her head as a warning to stay silent. She walked ahead of him, and it was clear to Winston that she had been this way before. He followed, carrying his flowers, feeling that he was not good enough for her. They were in an open space of grass between tall trees when the girl stopped and turned. "Here we are," she said. He stood quite close to her, but did not dare move nearer. "I didn't want to say anything on the path, because there might be microphones there, but we're all right here." He still was not brave enough to go near her. "We're all right here?" he repeated stupidly. "Yes. Look at the trees." They were small and thin. "There's nothing big enough to hide a microphone in, and I've been here before." He had managed to move closer to her now. She stood in front of him with a smile on her face. His flowers had fallen to the ground. He took her hand. "Until now, I didn't even know what color your eyes were," he said. "They were brown, light brown. And now you've seen what I'm really like. Can you even look at me?" "Yes, easily." "I'm 39 years old. I've got a wife that I can't get rid of. I've got a bad knee. I've got 5 false teeth." "I don't care," said the girl. The next moment she was in his arms on the grass. But the truth was that, although he felt proud, he also felt disbelief. He had no physical desire. It was too soon. Her beauty frightened him. Perhaps he was just used to living without women. The girl sat up and pulled a flower out of her hair. "Don't worry, dear. There's no hurry. Isn't this a wonderful place? I found it when I got lost once on a walk in the country with the Young People's League. If anyone was coming, you could hear them 100 meters away." "What's your name?" asked Winston. "Julia. I know yours. It's Winston. Winston Smith. Tell me, dear, what did you think of me before I gave you the note?" He did not even think of lying to her. It was like an offer of love to tell her the truth. "I hated the sight of you," he said. "If you really want to know, I thought you were in the thought police." The girl laughed, clearly pleased that she had hidden her true feelings so well. She pulled out some chocolate from the pocket of her overalls, broke it in half, and gave one of the pieces to Winston. It was very good chocolate. "Where did you get it?" he asked. "Oh, there are places," she said. "It's easier if you seem to be a good party member like me. I'm good at games. I was a group leader in the Spies. I work 3 evenings a week for the Young People's League. I spend hours and hours putting up posters all over London. I do anything they want, and I always look happy about it. It's the only way to be safe." The taste of the excellent chocolate was still in Winston's mouth. "You are very young," he said. "You're 10 or 15 years younger than I am. What did you find attractive in a man like me?" "It was something in your face. I thought I'd take a chance. I'm good at finding people who don't belong. When I first saw you, I knew you were against them." When Julia said them, she meant the party, especially the inner party. She spoke about them with real hate, using bad words. Winston did not dislike that. It was part of her personal war against the party. He kissed her softly, and took her hands in his. "Have you done this before?" "Of course. Hundreds of times. Well, a lot of times." "With party members?" "Yes." "With members of the inner party?" "Not with those pigs, no. But there are plenty that would if they got the chance. They're not as pure as they pretend to be." His heart raced. He hoped that the party was weakened by a lie. "Listen, the more men you've had, the more I love you. Do you understand that?" "Yes, perfectly." "You like doing this? I don't mean just me. I mean the thing itself." "I love it." That was what he wanted to hear. The need for sex, not the love of one person, would finish the party. He pressed her down on the grass. This time there was no difficulty. Afterwards they fell asleep and slept for about half an hour. Their love, their sex together, had beaten the party. It was a political act. Chapter 6. They Can't Get Inside You. Winston looked round the little room above Mr. Charrington's shop. As he had thought, Mr. Charrington had been happy to rent it to him. He did not even mind that Winston wanted the room to meet his lover. Everyone, he had said, wanted a place where they could be alone and private occasionally. They had taken the room because during the month of May they had made love only one more time. "It's safe to meet anywhere twice," Julia had said. Then they had had to see each other in the street, in a different place every evening, and never for more than half an hour at a time. The idea of having their own hiding place, indoors and near home, had been exciting for both of them. They were fools, Winston thought again. It was impossible to come here for more than a few weeks without being caught. But he needed her, and he felt he deserved her. Julia was 26 years old. She lived in a party building with 30 other girls. "All was the smell of women. I hate women," she said. And she worked, as he had guessed, on the story-writing machines. She enjoyed her job, looking after a powerful electric motor. She was not clever, and did not much enjoy reading, but she liked machinery. Life, as she saw it, was quite simple. You wanted a good time. They, meaning the party, wanted to stop you having it, so you broke the rules as well as you could. At that moment he heard her on the stairs outside, and then she ran into the room. She was carrying a bag. She went down on her knees, took packets of food from the bag, and put them on the floor. She had real sugar, real bread, real jam, all the good food that nobody had seen for years. And then— "This is the one I'm really proud of. I had to put paper round it because—" But she did not have to tell him why she had paper round it. The smell was already filling the room. "It's coffee," he said softly. "Real coffee. It's inner-party coffee. There's a whole kilo here," she said. "How did you get it?" "There's nothing those inner-party pigs don't have. But of course waiters and servants steal things, and— Look, I got a little packet of tea as well." Winston opened the packet. "It's real tea, not fruit leaves." "Yes," she said. "But listen, dear, I want you to turn your back on me for 3 minutes. Go and sit on the other side of the bed, and don't turn round until I tell you." Winston looked out of the window. He listened to a woman singing outside with deep feeling. Winston thought she would be quite happy if that June evening never ended. He had never heard a member of the party sing like that. "You can turn round now," said Julia. He turned round, and for a second almost did not recognize her. He thought she had taken her clothes off, but the change in her was more surprising than that. She had painted her face. He thought the makeup must be from a shop in the Prole area. Her lips were red, her face was smooth. There was even something under her eyes to make them brighter. It was not well done, but Winston did not know that. He had never before seen a woman in the party with makeup on. Julia looked prettier and much more like a woman. He took her in his arms. "Do you know what I'm going to do next?" she said. "I'm going to get a real woman's dress from somewhere and wear it instead of these horrible overalls. In this room, I'm going to be a woman, not a party comrade." After they made love, they fell asleep, and when Winston woke up, the hands on the clock showed nearly 9, 21 hours. He did not move because Julia was sleeping with her head on his arm. Most of her makeup was on the pillow or on him. They had never talked about marriage. It was impossible, even if Catherine died. Winston had told Julia about Catherine. She was good-thinkful in newspeak, unable to think a bad thought. She did not like sex. It was just our duty to the party. Julia had said it for him. Just to have children. Children who would one day spy on their parents and tell the party if they said or did anything wrong. In this way, the family had become part of the thought police. Catherine had not told the thought police about Winston only because she was too stupid to understand his opinions. Winston had thought about killing Catherine, and once nearly did. But now he and Julia were dead. When you disobeyed the party, you were dead. Julia woke up and put her hands over her eyes. "We are the dead," Winston said. "We're not dead yet," said Julia, pressing her body against his. "We may be together for another 6 months, a year. When they find us, there will be nothing either of us can do for the other." "We will tell them everything," she said. "Everybody always does. They make you feel so much pain." "Even if we tell them everything, that's not a betrayal. The betrayal would only be if they made me stop loving you." She thought about that. "They can't do that," she said finally. "It's the one thing they can't do. They can make you say anything, but they can't make you believe it. They can't get inside you." "No," he said, a little more hopefully. "No, that's quite true. They can't get inside you." "I'll get up and make some coffee," she said. "We've got an hour. What time do they turn the lights off at your flats?" 23:30. "It's 23 hours at the party building, but you have to get in earlier than that because—" She suddenly reached down from the bed to the floor, picked up a shoe, and threw it hard into the corner of the room. "What was it?" he said in surprise. "A rat. I saw his horrible little nose. There's a hole down there. I frightened him, I think." "Rats," said Winston quietly. "In this room?" "They're everywhere," said Julia, without much interest, as she lay down again. "We've even got them in the kitchen at the party building. Did you know they attack children? In some parts of London, a woman daren't leave a baby alone for 2 minutes. The big brown ones are the worst. They—" "Stop! Stop!" said Winston, his eyes tightly shut. "Dearest, you've gone quite pale. What's the matter?" "They are the most horrible things in the world. Rats." She put her arms round him, but he did not reopen his eyes immediately. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's nothing. I don't like rats, that's all." "Don't worry, dear. We won't have the dirty animals in here. I'll put something over the hole before we go." Julia got out of bed, put on her overalls and made the coffee. The smell was so powerful and exciting that they shut the window, worried that somebody outside would notice it and ask questions. And they could taste the real sugar in the coffee. It was even better than the taste of the coffee itself. Julia walked round the room with one hand in her pocket and a piece of bread and jam in the other. She looked at the books without interest. She told Winston the best way to repair the table. She sat down in the old armchair to see if it was comfortable. She smiled at the old 12-hour clock. "How old is that picture over there, do you think?" she asked. 100 years old? "More. 200. But it's impossible to discover the age of anything these days." She looked at it. "What is this place?" "It's a church. Well, that's what it used to be." When Winston got out of bed, it was dark. The room was a world, a past world, and they were the last 2 people from it who were still living. Chapter 7. Our leader, Emmanuel Goldstein. They vaporized Syme. One morning he was not at work. A few careless people talked about his absence. On the next day, nobody talked about him. His name disappeared from lists and newspapers. He did not exist. He had never existed. Parsons was helping to organize Hate Week. He was completely happy, running around, painting posters, singing the new hate song, smelling even more strongly of sweat in the hot weather. Daily life no longer caused Winston pain. He had stopped drinking gin at all hours, and his knee felt better. He did not want to shout angry words at the telescreen all the time. He met Julia 4, 5, 6, 7 times during the month of June. It was so hot at the end of the month that they lay on the bed in the room over Mr. Charrington's shop without clothes on. The rat had never come back. Sometimes they talked about a more open war against the party, but they did not know how to begin. Winston told her about the strange understanding that seemed to exist between himself and O'Brien. He sometimes felt like going to see him, telling him he was the enemy of the party, demanding O'Brien's help. Strangely, Julia did not think this was a wild idea. She judged people by their faces, and it seemed natural to her that the look in O'Brien's eyes made Winston believe in him. Also, she thought that everybody secretly hated the party, although she did not believe in Goldstein and the Brotherhood. She thought the party had invented them. And then at last it happened. All his life, it seemed to him, he had been waiting for this. There was a message from O'Brien. Winston was outside his office at the ministry when he heard a small cough behind him and turned. It was O'Brien. "I was reading your Newspeak article the other day. You know a lot about Newspeak, I believe." "Oh, not really. I've never invented any of the words." "But you write it very well," said O'Brien. "That is not only my own opinion. I was talking recently to a friend of yours who knows a lot about Newspeak. I can't remember his name at the moment." Winston's heart jumped. This could only mean Syme. But Syme was not only dead, he was vaporized, an unperson. It was dangerous to talk about an unperson. They could kill you for it. O'Brien was sharing a thought crime with him. "In your Newspeak article, you use 2 words which we have recently taken out of the language," said O'Brien. "Have you seen the new 10th edition?" "No," said Winston. "We still have the 9th in the office. The 10th will not be sent to offices for some months, but I have one. Would you like to see it, perhaps?" "Yes, very much," said Winston, who could see where this was leading. "You will be interested, I'm sure. You will like the smaller number of verbs. Shall I send someone to you with the dictionary? But I always forget that kind of thing. Perhaps you could collect it from my flat at a convenient time. Wait, let me give you my address." They were standing in front of a telescreen which could see what he was writing. He wrote an address in a notebook, pulled out the page and gave it to Winston. "I am usually at home in the evenings," he said. "If not, my servant will give you the dictionary." And then he was gone. They had done it. They had done it at last. The room was long, carpeted, and softly lit. The sound from the telescreen was low. At the far end of the room, O'Brien was sitting under a lamp with papers on either side of him. He did not look up when the servant showed Winston and Julia in. Winston's heart was beating fast. It was dangerous to arrive with Julia, although they had met only outside O'Brien's flat. And although O'Brien had invited him, he was still afraid of the black-uniformed guards in this enormous building, with its strange smells of good food and tobacco. But the guards had not ordered him out. O'Brien continued to work, and did not look pleased at the visit. It seemed quite possible to Winston that he had just made a stupid mistake. He could not even pretend that he had come only to borrow the dictionary. If he had, why was Julia here? O'Brien got up slowly from his chair and came towards them across the thick carpet. He pressed a switch on the wall, and the voice from the telescreen stopped. Julia gave a small cry of surprise, and without thinking, Winston said, "You can turn it off." "Yes," said O'Brien. "We can turn it off. We, in the inner party, are allowed to do that." Nobody spoke. Without the voice from the telescreen, the room was completely silent. Then O'Brien smiled. "Shall I say it, or will you?" he said. "I will say it," said Winston immediately. "That thing is really turned off?" "Yes. We are alone." Winston paused. He did not know exactly what he expected from O'Brien. Then he continued. "We believe that there is a secret organization working against the party, and that you are part of it. We want to join it and work for it. We are enemies of the party. We are lovers, and we are thought criminals. And now we are in your power." O'Brien took a bottle and filled 3 glasses with dark red liquid. It reminded Winston of something he had seen a long time ago. Julia picked up her glass and smelled the liquid with great interest. "It is called wine," said O'Brien with a small smile. "Not much of it gets to ordinary party members, I'm afraid." His face became serious again, and he lifted his glass. "To our leader," he said. "To Emmanuel Goldstein." Winston lifted his glass, wide-eyed. Wine was a thing he had read and dreamed about. For some reason he always thought it tasted sweet, but it tasted of nothing. The truth was that after years of drinking gin, he could taste almost nothing. "So, Goldstein is a real person," he said. "Yes, he is. And he is alive. Where, I do not know." "And the Brotherhood is real too? It was not invented by the thought police?" "No, it is real. But you will never learn much more about the Brotherhood than that." He looked at his watch. "It is unwise even for me to turn the telescreen off for more than half an hour. It was a mistake for both of you to arrive here together, and you, comrade," he looked at Julia, "will have to leave first. We have about 20 minutes. Now, what are you prepared to do?" "Anything that we can," said Winston. O'Brien had turned himself a little in his chair, so that he was looking at Winston. He seemed to think that Winston could answer for Julia. "You are willing to give your lives?" "Yes." "You are willing to murder another person?" "Yes." "You are willing to cause the death of hundreds of innocent people?" "Yes." "If, for example, it would help us to blind a child and destroy its face, would you do that?" "Yes." "Are you willing to kill yourselves if we order you to do so?" "Yes." "You are willing, the two of you, to separate and never see each other again?" "No!" shouted Julia. It seemed to Winston that a long time passed before he answered. "No," he said finally. "You did well to tell me," said O'Brien. "It is necessary for us to know everything." O'Brien started walking up and down, one hand in the pocket of his black overalls, the other holding a cigarette. "You understand," he said, "that secrets will always be kept from you. You will receive orders, and you will obey them without knowing why. Later, I shall send you a book by Emmanuel Goldstein. When you have read the book, you will be full members of the Brotherhood. When you are finally caught, you will get no help. Sometimes we are able to get a razor blade into the prison to silence someone, but you are more likely to tell them all you know, although you will not know very much. We are the dead. We are fighting for a better life for people in the future." He stopped and looked at his watch. "It is almost time for you to leave, comrade," he said to Julia. "Wait, there is still some wine." He filled the glasses and held up his own glass. "What shall we drink to? To the death of Big Brother? To the future?" "To the past," said Winston. "Yes, the past is more important," said O'Brien seriously. They finished the wine, and a moment later Julia stood up to go. When she had left, Winston stood up, and he and O'Brien shook hands. At the door he looked back, but O'Brien was already at his desk, doing his important work for the party.